The sun blazed mercilessly over the Nebraska plains, pouring fire across miles of swaying grass. Sarah Wittman's bare feet were torn and bleeding, leaving faint red trails across the dry prairie. Her cream-colored dress, once clean and whole, now clung to her in ragged strips. She had been running since before dawn, running until her lungs burned and her legs shook, running because she could not bear one more day in Redemption Creek. Her father had promised her to the blacksmith, Thomas Brennan. Everyone in town knew his fists were as heavy as his hammer, that whiskey ruled his temper, and that no woman ever left his house without bruises. The preacher had blessed the match, her father had sealed it with a handshake, and tomorrow, maybe today, she was to be his wife. But Sarah would rather face wolves, rattlesnakes, or death in the wilderness than that man's bed. The hot wind carried the smell of sage and dust, and then something else. Leather, horse sweat. Sarah froze, panic seizing her chest. She turned, expecting her father's men thundering after her, but the horizon lay empty. The sound came again, not from behind but from the north. A lone rider crested a hill, horse and man framed against the burning sky. Her breath caught. He was no townsman. His long black hair flowed free, his leather shirt decorated with beads, his proud shoulders steady in the saddle. A Lakota warrior. Every tale the townsfolk told of Indians rushed back at once. Stories of raids, of scalping, of women stolen and never seen again. Her first instinct was to run, but exhaustion rooted her where she knelt in the grass. Something in the man's bearing held her still. The warrior reined his paint mare 20 feet away and raised one hand, palm outward. The gesture was clear. Peace. When he spoke, his English was careful but steady. "You are hurt," Sarah tried to answer, but only a dry croak escaped. Black spots danced at the edge of her vision. He dismounted in one fluid motion, tall and lean, his movements as graceful as a hunting cat. From his saddlebag he drew a water skin and offered it. She drank greedily until his hand gently took it back. Slow. He warned, "Too much makes you sick." His eyes were dark and unreadable, but there was no hunger, no cruelty in them. Only weariness and quiet judgment. He studied her torn feet, her bruised legs. Then he crouched, pulling strips of soft leather from his pack. "Feet first," he said simply. She hesitated. No man had ever touched her without harm, yet when his hands worked, they were steady and careful. He cleaned her wounds, bound her cuts, and wrapped her feet with surprising gentleness. She flinched at first, then slowly relaxed. "My name is Joseph Running Elk," he said after a long silence. "My mother was white. She stayed with my father's people, taught me her tongue. Sarah," she whispered hoarsely. "Sarah Wittman." He nodded, "Sarah." Men follow, tears welled, slipping down her dust-streaked cheeks. "My father, others, they'll make me." The words broke in her throat. Joseph scanned the horizon with sharp eyes, then seemed to decide. He pulled a blanket from his horse and draped it over her shoulders. "Dark comes soon. Coyotes hunt at night. Men, too. You come." "I know a place." Sarah stared at his outstretched hand. Every lesson drilled into her screamed savage, dangerous, enemy. Yet those same voices had told her to obey her father, to marry Thomas Brennan, to suffer quietly. Those voices had never once offered her safety. With trembling fingers, she took his hand. He lifted her easily, settling her on his mare before leading the horse north. Sarah braced herself for him to mount behind her, to press too close, but he only walked at the horse's head, steady and silent. As the sun bled into the horizon, they reached a line of cottonwoods sheltering a quiet stream. A simple hide shelter stood tucked against the trees. Joseph tended his horse first, brushing her coat before gathering wood for a fire. He cooked a small stew, handed her a bowl, and spoke without demand. "Eat, then sleep. Tomorrow, My people give you clothes for travel." Sarah sat inside the small shelter, the blanket around her shoulders. Through the opening, she watched him feed the fire. Each movement was efficient, sure, unhurried. No leering glances, no rough words. Only a man seeing to his duties as the night fell. For the first time in years, as coyotes howled in the distance, Sarah felt the unfamiliar weight of safety. Sleep took her gently, and her dreams were not of fists or chains, but of running. Running not away, but toward something new, something unnamed waiting beyond the horizon. The fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers when Sarah stirred awake. For a moment, panic seized her, but then she remembered the flight, the warrior, the blanket around her shoulders. Joseph Running Elk still sat by the fire, awake, steady as the cottonwoods. Had he really kept watch all night? When he saw her rise, he pointed toward the stream water there. "Clean yourself." "I will not look." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. Sarah wrapped the blanket tighter and limped to the stream. The icy water stung her wounds but also refreshed her, washing away dirt, blood, and the last traces of Redemption Creek. For the first time, she saw herself reflected clearly, a frightened girl running from a cage, but perhaps slowly becoming something else. When she returned, Joseph had laid out a leather dress, moccasins, and cloth strips for her hair. "My sister's," he explained. "She has many. She will not mind." Sarah touched the beadwork along the hem, astonished by its beauty. She changed inside the shelter, and when she stepped out, Joseph nodded once. "Better." He packed quickly, then helped her mount. This time he swung up behind her, but his hands stayed light at her waist, guiding only when the horse shifted. They rode northward, the prairie rolling endlessly around them. At midday they stopped in the shade of a rocky bluff. Joseph pointed to tracks in the dirt antelope. He said, "Fresh. 1 hour, or maybe less." He showed her broken twigs, bent grass, faint signs she would have overlooked. "The land speaks." "You must learn to listen," Sarah tried, watching as he explained with quiet patience. No scorn, no harsh words when she guessed wrong. Just calm correction, steady teaching. Something inside her softened, realizing how different it felt to be guided instead of ordered. They continued through the hills until late afternoon, when Joseph suddenly stiffened. He raised his hand, halting the horse. "Smoke," he murmured. His body went still, like a wolf scenting danger. Sarah's heart raced. They crept up a slope and looked down into a meadow. The charred remains of a wagon smoldered below, 2 bodies lying lifeless beside it. Arrows jutted from their backs. "Crow," Joseph said grimly. "War party." 6, maybe 7. 2 hours passed. Gone east, fear tightened Sarah's chest. Will they come back? "No," he said, though his voice was hard. "But Crow and Lakota are enemies. If they find you with me." He didn't finish. Instead, he turned their horse into a narrow path through the hills, choosing safety over speed. By nightfall, they sheltered in a shallow cave. Joseph built a small fire, careful to keep it hidden from sight. Sarah helped gather wood, earning a small nod of approval. They shared dried meat and berries before silence settled. Finally, she asked the question that weighed on her. "Why are you helping me?" For a long while he stared into the fire. At last, he spoke. "My mother ran too. White men sent her back to the one who hurt her. She ran again. My father found her half frozen in winter. She chose to stay, to live free. She taught me her tongue, her ways. She died 5 winters past, but she lived free. All people deserve this." Sarah's throat tightened. No one had ever spoken of freedom as if it were a right. To her, it had always been a stolen dream, punished when caught your sister's dress. She asked softly, "Won't she mind?" "Morning Star will be glad," he said. "She tells me to see good in the world again. Perhaps you prove her right." He shifted. and in the firelight Sarah saw another scar along his ribs. She hesitated, then asked, "Your wife, Winter Dove," he said quietly, "killed in cavalry attack. 4 summers passed. They came at dawn. Shot into the teepee." No warning, Sarah swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." Quote, "Your sorrow cannot change the past," he said, "but you remind me that not all whites are soldiers. Some are just people, hurting, needing help." They sat in silence. Outside, owls called to each other, the prairie winds whispering through the canyon walls. Joseph finally looked at her. "Tomorrow we reach my people. You will be safe there." "Do not fear safe," the word lodged in Sarah's chest. Could such a place exist for someone like her? She pulled the blanket closer, feeling the fire's warmth and his steady presence. Perhaps it could. As sleep pulled her under, she realized something. Joseph Running Elk had given her more than food, more than protection. He had given her choice, the very thing Redemption Creek had denied her. The sun rose pale and cold, silver light washing the prairie in quiet beauty. Sarah woke to birdsong and the faint smell of wood smoke. Joseph still sat at the cave's edge, his profile sharp against the morning sky. His eyes were tired, but his posture remained alert, as though he had not closed them all night. By noon they reached the Lakota camp. Teepees stood in a circle by a stream, smoke rising in soft columns into the sky. Children darted between the lodges. Dogs barked, women scraped hides and stirred pots. All eyes turned to Sarah as Joseph led her in. A tall man with hair streaked white stepped forward. Joseph spoke quickly in Lakota, then turned to Sarah. "My uncle, Chief Stonehand. He leads here." The chief studied her with grave eyes. When Joseph finished, he nodded slowly. Then he placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. Joseph translated. "He says you may stay. Sanctuary is given. Here you choose your path." The words struck Sarah like thunder. Sanctuary. Choice. 2 things she had never been offered. The days that followed blurred into a new rhythm. Morning Star, Joseph's sister, taught her how to scrape hides and bead patterns. The work was hard, her hands clumsy, but Morning Star laughed and guided her patiently. In the afternoons, Joseph found her, teaching her how to read the land, tracks in the dust, signs of game, plants that healed or harmed. His lessons were calm, his patience endless. For the first time, Sarah felt herself learning not just to survive, but to live. She was not property here, not cattle to be traded, nor a daughter to be sold. She was a person. But peace never lasts long on the frontier. It was early morning when the dogs barked, their snarls sharp and furious. Warriors reached for bows and knives. Joseph appeared at Sarah's side, his hand on his blade. "Stay close," he ordered. From the edge of camp, 5 riders approached. Sarah's breath turned to ice. Her father rode at the front, his red face twisted with fury. Beside him was Thomas Brennan, the blacksmith, his massive frame hunched like a bear. 3 other men followed, rifles slung across their backs. "I know she's here." Samuel Wittman's voice boomed across the camp. "My daughter, Sarah. She's coming home." Quote. Chief Stonehand stepped forward, Joseph at his side to translate. "Why do armed men enter our peaceful camp?" the chief demanded. "She was stolen," Samuel snarled, "spitting tobacco into the dirt, taken by your savage." Sarah's hands shook, but she stepped forward. "I wasn't stolen," she said, her voice ringing clear. "I ran. I chose to leave." Thomas's laugh was bitter and ugly. "Women don't choose, girl. You belong to your father until you belong to me. That's the law." "White man's law has no power here," Joseph said coldly. Her father's hand twitched toward his pistol. "Boy, hand her over or—" He never finished. Joseph's knife flashed in the sun, and Lakota warriors drew their bows in one fluid motion. Arrows aimed true, their silence more dangerous than 100 shouts. 5 men against many. Joseph said evenly, "You threaten those under our protection." "That ends here." Thomas spat. "She's a white woman living among savages. Good men have a duty to save her." Sarah's fear turned to anger. Her voice rose, trembling but fierce. "The only savages I've known were in Redemption Creek. Here I've found respect. Here I've found safety. Her father's face turned purple with rage. Ungrateful witch. After everything I did for you. You beat me! The words burst out before she could stop them. You sold me like cattle. Silence fell. Even the dogs stilled. Sarah's voice shook, but she didn't stop. I will not go back. I will not belong to you or to him. I choose my life here. I choose freedom. Samuel lunged, hand raised to strike. But Joseph caught his wrist mid-air, holding it fast with unyielding strength. You will not touch her. Not here. Not ever again. The blacksmith bellowed, ripping his pistol free. But before he could fire, a dozen arrows hissed past, thudding into the dirt around his boots. His horse reared, throwing him hard to the ground. The message was clear. The next volley would not misleave now. Chief Stonehand said, Joseph's voice carrying his words like iron, "Do not return." Her father glared at Sarah, fury, and something darker burning in his eyes. You're dead to me, girl. You hear? Dead. Sarah met his gaze, her voice steady. Then I've been dead to you a long time already. The 5 men wheeled their horses and rode hard from the camp, dust rising behind them. Silence lingered until the last echo faded. Then Chief Stonehand placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. He spoke, and Joseph translated. Today you claimed your freedom before all. You spoke with the heart of a warrior. From this day, you are Wayaka Win, Feather Woman, for you have learned to fly free like the eagle. Tears blurred Sarah's eyes. She had fled Redemption Creek as a terrified girl. Now she stood as Feather Woman, no longer owned, no longer silent. For the first time, she belonged to no one but herself. And when Joseph Running Elk stepped quietly beside her, his eyes steady, his voice low with a promise, Sarah understood something else. She had not only found freedom, she had found love. Love that asked nothing, love that gave everything. A love she chose.